It's 1993, a bank in Brooklyn. Two masked men are holding three people hostage, and a man named Chris Voss is on the phone with them, knowing that the wrong word could get someone killed. He doesn't threaten them. He doesn't give ultimatums. He asks a question. That single move is what built his entire career. And it's worth knowing exactly whose career we're talking about. Voss wasn't just a hostage negotiator, he became the FBI's lead international kidnapping negotiator, a title held by exactly one person at a time, not a team. Everything you're about to learn was tested at that level, then scaled down for the rest of us. To see how it scales down, let's make this real. Meet Sarah, marketing manager, 3 years at the same company. In the last 12 months, she's absorbed a second team's workload after a layoff, launched 2 campaigns that beat targets, and hasn't had a raise since she started. She's finally decided to ask. Chapter 2. The FBI Method versus the Harvard Method. Most negotiation advice everyone's already heard comes from one place. Harvard's Getting to Yes. Logic, fairness, facts, rational compromise. Voss spent his career arguing that model breaks down the moment real stakes and real emotion enter the room, which is every salary conversation you'll ever have. His replacement isn't logic, it's trust. So Sarah doesn't open with, "I think I deserve a raise." She opens with, "I know Q4 budgets are tight, and I know you're the one who has to justify any number to the people above you." That's not a concession. It's proof she understands her manager's pressure before she's asked him for a single dollar. The moment he stops seeing her as a threat to his budget, the whole conversation changes shape. Chapter 3. Why splitting the difference is a trap. Her manager responds the way most managers do. "Yeah, honestly, this year's been rough on headcount costs." Most people would counter that immediately. Sarah doesn't. She mirrors it, repeats the last few words back as a question. "Rough on headcount costs?" And stays quiet. That silence is uncomfortable, and it works. He fills it, explaining exactly which budget lines are under pressure and which aren't. This is the whole argument behind the book's title. Meeting in the middle feels fair, but it ignores the actual fears and constraints driving the other person's decision, which Sarah just got her manager to hand her for free, simply by staying quiet. Chapter 4. Getting to No. Before yes. Here's where Sarah does something that feels completely backwards, and it's the part of this book most people get wrong the first time they try it. Every instinct you have when you want something tells you to angle for a yes. Ask a question that's easy to agree to. Get some momentum going. Warm them up. That's the standard playbook. And Voss says it's exactly the wrong instinct because yes is one of the least reliable words in the English language. Think about how often people say yes just to make a conversation end. A salesperson corners you, you say, "Yes, sounds great, send me the info," and you never open the email. A friend asks if you're free Saturday, you say, "Yeah, probably," just to avoid the follow-up questions. Voss calls this a counterfeit yes. It's not a commitment, it's an exit. And in a negotiation, chasing that kind of yes just means you'll walk away thinking you got somewhere when you didn't. No, on the other hand, is different. No doesn't feel like giving something away. It feels safe. It feels like keeping control. And because it feels safe, people are far more willing to actually tell you the truth right after they say it, which is exactly the information you need if you're about to ask for a raise. So Sarah doesn't walk up to her manager's desk and ask, "Can we talk about a raise?" On paper, that sounds direct and confident. In practice, it's a trap with only two exits, and both are bad for her. If he says yes, he's mentally already bracing for a number he probably doesn't want to hear, which puts him on the defensive before she's said anything else. If he says no, not now, not a good time, the conversation is over, and she's left wondering if not now actually means never. Instead, she asks it a completely different way. Would it be a bad time to talk about how my role's grown this year? Notice what that question is actually built to do. It's not asking for a yes. It's structured so that the comfortable, natural answer is no. No, it's not a bad time. And the moment he says that no, something shifts. He's not agreeing to a raise conversation. He's just agreeing that right now isn't a bad time to talk. That's a much smaller, much safer thing to agree to, and it's exactly why he'll actually say it. This is the part people miss. Getting a no here isn't a small technicality. It's the entire opening move, because now that he's said no, meaning yes, now is fine. He's the one who feels like he's in control of the conversation. He wasn't cornered into anything. He wasn't pressured into a number. He simply agreed that this wasn't a bad moment to talk. And people who feel in control of a conversation are dramatically more likely to be honest in it instead of guarded. That's the shift Sarah's counting on. A minute earlier, if she'd asked, "Can we talk about a raise?" she'd be sitting across from a manager already calculating how to say no. Instead, she's sitting across from a manager who just voluntarily opened the door, in his own words, and who's now going to talk to her like a person he trusts, not a budget line he's defending against. That one substitution, trading a yes or no trap for a question engineered to land on no, is doing more work in this conversation than almost anything Sarah says afterward. It's the difference between walking into a negotiation and walking into a conversation that just happens to end in one. Chapter 5. The phrase that tells you it worked. They keep talking through the specifics, the second team she absorbed, the two campaigns that beat their targets, the extra hours nobody officially asked her to put in, but that kept the department from falling behind. Her manager is listening, nodding, but Sarah can tell he's not fully in the conversation yet. He's still partly in his own head, running numbers, thinking about how this looks to the people above him. So she does something most people skip entirely. Instead of listing one more accomplishment, she names what she thinks he's actually feeling. It sounds like you're worried that if you push for this, it makes the whole team's budget conversation harder. That's not a guess thrown out randomly. It's what Voss calls labeling, putting a name on the emotion sitting underneath the conversation instead of pretending it isn't there. Her manager pauses. Then he says, "Yeah, that's right." That two-word response is the single most important moment in this entire negotiation, and almost nobody watching this video would have caught why. Here's the distinction. If he'd said, "You're right," Sarah should actually be worried. "You're right" is what people say when they want a conversation to be over. It's polite. It's dismissive. It's the verbal equivalent of someone nodding along in a meeting while they're mentally already somewhere else. People say, "You're right," to agree just enough to move on, not because they feel understood, but because disagreeing takes more energy than they want to spend right now. "That's right" is different. It doesn't come out smoothly. It usually comes with a pause first, like Sarah just heard. Yeah, that's right, because the other person is actually processing whether what you said matches what they're feeling, not just scanning for the fastest way to end the exchange. When someone says, "That's right," they're not agreeing with your argument. They're confirming you correctly understood something they hadn't even said out loud yet. And that changes everything about what happens next. A manager who feels cornered spends the rest of the conversation defending his budget, his headcount, his decision. A manager who feels understood stops defending and starts problem solving. Because Sarah just proved she's not attacking his position, she's read it accurately. From this point on, he's no longer negotiating against her. He's negotiating alongside her, trying to figure out how to make this work. That's the real function of labeling. It's not about sounding empathetic for its own sake. It's a diagnostic tool, a way to test in real time whether the other person actually feels heard. If you get "you're right," you know you haven't landed it yet and you need to try again. If you get "that's right," you know the wall just came down and the conversation has quietly turned into a partnership instead of a standoff. Chapter 6. The Ackerman Model. The exact numbers. Now the numbers. This is the part of the book almost every summary video skips because it's harder to explain than listen more or stay calm. It actually requires walking through the math, but it's also the single most usable tool in this entire negotiation, so it's worth slowing down for. Sarah's target is $10,000. Most people in her position would open with exactly that number. Clean, round, easy to say out loud. Voss says that's precisely the instinct to fight. Round numbers sound like guesses. 10,000, 20,000, 50,000. These are numbers people reach for because they're easy to remember, not because they're backed by anything, and the other side can sense that instantly. A round number invites a counter because it feels negotiable by design. So Sarah doesn't lead with a figure at all. She anchors first around the value she's actually delivered. The second team, the 2 campaigns, the extra hours, and lets that sit in the room without attaching a dollar amount to it yet. She's not being coy. She's making sure the conversation is about impact before it's about a number, because once a number is on the table, that's all anyone remembers. Only when her manager asks directly, "So what are you thinking?" does she give him a figure. And she doesn't say 10,000. She says 9,500. That gap matters more than it looks like it should. An odd, specific number does something a round one can't. It signals that a real calculation happened somewhere before this conversation. 9,500 doesn't sound like a wish. It sounds like a number that came from somewhere. Market research, a formula, a real audit of her contributions. Even if, in reality, it's simply a number Sarah chose because it's 95% of her actual target. This is the core of what Voss calls the Ackerman model. Instead of asking for your number and negotiating down from there, you approach your target through a series of deliberately non-round figures, each one signaling precision instead of hope. In Sarah's case, that final number, 9,500, isn't the ceiling of what she's willing to accept. It's the number engineered to make her manager feel like he's negotiating with someone who's already done the homework, not someone throwing out a hopeful ask and waiting to see what sticks. And that's exactly why it works. A round number gives the other person permission to negotiate down because it feels arbitrary enough to argue with. An odd number feels like it's already been negotiated once by Sarah with herself, which makes it far harder to talk down without a real reason. More often than not, that's the exact number that closes the gap between a manager saying, "Let me think about it," and a manager saying yes on the spot. Chapter 7. Anger as a Tool, Not a Mistake. At one point, her manager comes back with a number that's almost insulting, roughly half of what she asked for. This is the moment most negotiation advice completely falls apart, because most of it tells you to do one of two things: swallow it and stay agreeable, or push back hard and risk turning the room hostile. Voss says both instincts are wrong, and the real answer is more precise than either. Sarah doesn't go quiet and accept it. Staying silent here would read as agreement, like the number is at least in the right neighborhood when it isn't. But she also doesn't raise her voice or let frustration spill out unfiltered. Both of those reactions hand control of the conversation to emotion instead of strategy. And once that happens, nobody in the room is thinking clearly anymore. Not her, and not her manager either. Instead, she does something much more deliberate. She lets a controlled edge into her voice, real, not performed, and aims it precisely at the number, never at him. I have to be honest, that number's hard for me to sit with, given what this year actually looked like. Notice everything that sentence is doing. It says, "I have to be honest," signaling this isn't rehearsed corporate speak, this is a real reaction. It says, that number, not you. The offer is the problem, not the person sitting across from her. And it ties straight back to the evidence she already built earlier in the conversation, given what this year actually looked like. So the frustration isn't floating on its own, it's anchored to facts he already agreed with. This is exactly what Voss means when he says anger has to be real to work, but controlled to be useful. Real, because people can tell the difference between genuine frustration and a tactic. A fake reaction reads as manipulation and destroys trust instantly. Controlled, because anger physically limits how well the brain processes information. If Sarah actually lost her temper, she'd stop thinking clearly, and so would he. And the conversation would shift from solving a problem to managing a conflict. Said once, said calmly, not repeated, not escalated. Just one clear signal that the number landed wrong, delivered in a way that keeps the door open instead of slamming it shut. That's the difference between anger as a mistake and anger as a tool. A mistake damages the relationship and gets remembered long after the meeting ends. A tool, aimed correctly, controlled precisely, tells the other person exactly where the line is, without giving them anything to defend against except the number itself. Chapter 8. What Hollywood Gets Wrong. Worth knowing before you try any of this yourself. Almost everything you think you know about tough negotiation probably came from a screen, and Voss says nearly all of it is wrong. Think about the version of negotiation that shows up in movies and TV. Someone slams a folder on the table. Voices get louder as the scene builds toward a climax. One side delivers an ultimatum, stands up, and walks toward the door, and the other side chases after them with a better offer before the door closes. It's dramatic, it's satisfying to watch, and according to the person who actually did this for a living, it's almost never how real negotiation works. Voss has said directly that TV gets hostage negotiation and high-stakes deal-making wrong almost across the board. The truck rolls up, Someone hands over a phone, and the negotiator starts making demands like it's a poker match. In reality, that's closer to the opposite of what actually gets someone to change their mind. The loud, forceful, walk away and see if they chase you version of negotiating isn't just inaccurate. It's the version most likely to blow up a real conversation, whether that's a hostage situation or a conversation about your salary. The one exception he's actually pointed to is the film The Negotiator, starring Samuel L. Jackson and Kevin Spacey, which he's rated as somewhere around 70 to 75% realistic, closer than anything else Hollywood has produced, but still not a perfect picture. Even his one approved example comes with an asterisk. So, if the mental image you're carrying into your next raised conversation is dramatic, raised voices, a firm ultimatum, maybe even a rehearsed line about walking away if they don't meet your number, that's exactly the model this book was written to dismantle. Real negotiation, the kind Voss built his entire career on, doesn't look tense and combative from the outside. It looks like a calm conversation where one person is quietly asking better questions than the other. No slammed folders, no raised voices, just someone who knows exactly which question to ask next. That's a harder thing to dramatize on screen, which is probably exactly why nobody's made a movie that gets it right. Chapter 9. Not everyone agrees with him. To be fair, this book isn't without pushback, and it's worth including that honestly, instead of pretending everything in it is beyond question. Some readers have flagged a real tension at the center of this book. Voss built every single one of these techniques inside a world where the stakes were literally life and death. Bank robberies, kidnappings, terrorists holding hostages. That's the laboratory this method was tested in. And when you take tools forged under that kind of pressure and hand them to someone prepping for a performance review, there's a legitimate question worth asking. Does the intensity translate, or does it just import a kind of tension that doesn't belong in an office? A review from a Harvard student investment group raised exactly this point, noting that Voss's language throughout the book can read as more aggressive than most everyday negotiations actually call for. Their critique wasn't that the techniques don't work, it's that the framing sometimes treats an ordinary conversation, like asking for a raise or negotiating a car price, with the same weight and edge as talking someone down from a standoff. For readers who take that framing too literally, there's a risk of walking into low-stakes conversations, acting like every ask is a high-stakes confrontation. That's a fair point, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Sarah didn't walk into her manager's office treating him like a hostage-taker. She used the mechanics, mirroring, labeling, getting to know, anchoring with odd numbers, one controlled flash of frustration, without importing the tension those tools were originally built to survive. The skill isn't just knowing the techniques, it's knowing how much pressure the moment actually calls for, and dialing the intensity down to match it. So going in, it's worth holding two things at once. The tools in this book are genuinely effective, tested in rooms with far higher stakes than a salary conversation will ever have. But that doesn't mean every office negotiation needs FBI-level intensity behind it. The best use of this book isn't running Sarah's exact script word for word with a knife-edge tone. It's borrowing the structure and leaving the hostage negotiation stakes where they belong. Chapter 10. Proof. It works at the highest level. This isn't just theory built for a book, and it isn't just something that happened to work for one FBI negotiator inside one bank standoff in 1993. The core idea at the center of this entire method, that no isn't a wall, it's a doorway, shows up again in one of the most successful negotiators in modern business, operating in a completely different world with completely different stakes. Mark Cuban has spent decades negotiating deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, buying companies, selling companies, structuring investments on national television in front of millions of viewers who are watching specifically to see how the negotiation unfolds. He's not reading this book for a theory exercise. He's someone whose actual net worth has been shaped by how well he negotiates, deal after deal, for most of his adult life. And what he said, in his own words, about how he approaches a no is almost identical to the mechanism Sarah used across the desk from her manager. Every no gets him closer to a yes. Not because he's an optimist repeating a motivational line, but because he's operating on the same principle Voss spent his FBI career testing. A no isn't rejection, it's information. It tells you what's not working, what the real objection is, what needs to shift before the other side can move. Every no narrows the field. It's not a step backward, it's a step closer. Think about what that means when you line it up next to Sarah's conversation. She didn't get her full ask on the first pass. She got pushback, a lowball counter, a moment where the conversation could have stalled out entirely. If she'd treated that no as a rejection, a sign to back off, or to just accept whatever was offered, the conversation ends there, at a worse number than she deserved. Instead, she treated it as exactly what Cuban treats every no, as a data point, not a verdict. Information about where the real conversation still needs to go. That's the real proof. This isn't just a clever hostage negotiation trick that happens to sound good in a business book. It's the same operating principle showing up independently in someone who negotiates for a living, at a scale most people will never touch, with zero connection to Voss's FBI background. Two completely different worlds, a bank standoff and a boardroom acquisition. And the same underlying mindset works in both. If that mindset holds up when the number on the table has 9 figures, it will absolutely hold up across a desk from your manager over a raise that's a rounding error by comparison. The scale is different. The math underneath it is exactly the same. Chapter 11. The Outcome. By the end of that conversation, Sarah doesn't walk out with everything she asked for. Nobody usually does. But she walks out with a number much closer to 9,500 than the one her manager opened with, because she never let the conversation drift toward some flat, forgettable midpoint. That's the entire point of everything you just watched. Not a script to memorize, but a shift in how you think about the conversation before you ever sit down. So next time you're the one across the table asking for more money, more title, more room to grow, you're not walking in with a number and a hope. You're walking in with Sarah's plan. Build trust first, before you ask for anything. Get to no before you get to yes, because no is what makes people feel safe enough to be honest. Listen for that's right, not you're right. One means the wall just came down. The other means the conversation is over. Anchor with odd numbers instead of round ones, because precision reads as calculation, not hope. And if you have to push back at the number, never at the person sitting across from you. None of this requires FBI-level pressure, and none of it requires turning your next performance review into a standoff. That's not what this book is actually teaching. It's just better math, better questions, and better timing, applied to a conversation you were always going to have anyway.